Great. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with this month's Innovation Exchange. I'm happy to see some additional participants beyond our Faculty Advisory Council. That's awesome. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Leslie Umstattd, and she is one of Park's newest instructional designers, and she will be presenting an Innovation Exchange about student engagement. Leslie.
Thank you. So I asked you at the very beginning, and there's two questions. One is define student engagement in one word. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds to work on that for those of you who are just joining us online. Those of you who are joining us here on campus, talk with your groups if you're in a group. If you want to post, do that as well. Betty's manning our online. Student engagement in one word, about 30 seconds. And I'm literally keeping you to the 30 seconds because I have like 15 minutes to cover a lot of information. Talk to your groups. Share your ideas.
The word that came in.
Do we have any?
I'm curious, but not
Activity,
mostly because I'm really curious, George. Curious excitement would work well, but we were only allowed one word.
One word, I'm telling you.
What's your course? They're engaged. Yeah, we can't use it.
Take about 10 more seconds. Each table here on campus, choose one spokesperson. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to review the definition of engagement. As Emily said, I'm Leslie Umstattd. I'm one of the instructional designers here. And I was hired, so I've only been here for a few months. But today what we're going to do is we're going to define student engagement. We are going to talk about the 3 different kinds of student engagement. And my goal when you leave here is for you not to blow it. I'm showing a blow pop for those of you who are online. Blow it with student engagement, but rather take a nugget, chocolate nugget, of information away that you can apply. Yes, I know I'm cheesy. I used to be an elementary school teacher, but you can always win a heart over with chocolate. So
That's right.
Chocolate's a good thing. For those of you who are online, I'm sorry you're missing the chocolate and the blow pop. So today what we're going to do is we're going to define it, talk about it, 3 types. Practical things that you can immediately, some of these are immediate, like take back to your class and go, oh, I can apply this now. If you look at our quote here, it says, tell me I forget, teach me I remember, involve me and I learn. And we had a little confusion as to whether it was actually Benjamin Franklin or Confucius, right, who said it. The quote's out there. The point is involvement. So there's our first one word of student engagement is involvement. If you'll go to the next slide, that would be great. So this definition actually came from the Educational Reform, the Dictionary for Educational Reform. And you see a couple of words on here, but before we jump to those words, Stacy, tell me what was one of your words that you
I said interaction.
Interaction. What about over here?
Curiosity.
Curiosity.
Relevant.
Relevant.
Involved, fun, active.
Okay. What about over here?
Excitement, curiosity.
Okay, so the idea of involvement, action, we can all talk about these words, but the million-dollar question is, how do we implement these words? If you look at the definition here, it says attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, passion. These are all things that you're having to process as instructors while you still teach the content. So 16 weeks, 8 weeks, online, on campus, you're supposed to grab the student's attention, pique their curiosity, keep their interest, raise their levels of optimism about the content, and somehow in all of that generate passion for what you're teaching about, right? That's easy, right? We're all shaking our heads and we're laughing and we're going, yeah, it doesn't quite work that way. What about the student who's barely struggling in your class? Are they curious about what's going on? How do you garner that optimism and interest? So it's not that we don't know what engagement is, it's the bridge of getting us to actually apply it in our courses. How and what does that even look like? And that's why you're here today, so that I can tell you. Now, there are 3 types, if you'll go to the next slide. There are 3 types of engagement. And some of you, this is going to look familiar. This is not going to be new information for you. You're going to go, yep, I know what this looks like. And some of you are going to go, huh, I've never realized that. You're doing it, you just didn't realize that's what it was. So you have instructor to student, which is, I mean, most of these are pretty self-explanatory, right? Instructor to student. How am I as an instructor engaging with my students? Student to student. As here on campus, they're all sitting in little groups, as you can see from the picture. Maybe not, I don't know if you can anymore. But student to students, how are students interacting with each other? Now, in a face-to-face class, this is kind of a little bit easier to incorporate. When you start talking about online, how am I as an instructor engaging my students online? I mean, they're coming in at all hours of the day and night. They're doing their assignments. What role do I have as an instructor to actually engage them and generate that curiosity? How can I do that? The last one is student-to-student content. This is where, at least in the online world, we see the highest points of engagement. Because the way online is set up, it's content-driven. And it becomes almost, excuse my language, verbal vomit of content, where you go, here, and you throw the content out, and you go, learn it. And you hope that somewhere along the way something catches. And somewhere along the way they may at least be able to pass the assessments, get through the class, pass it, and move on to their next class. In face-to-face, you typically see more of a mix of this, because you're standing up as an instructor, looking at each one of your students each day. You are able to interact in ways with them that they cannot do if they're in an online course. I'm not seeing you face-to-face. I am not meeting with you 2 or 3 times a week to see you. So one of the things I wanted to do with this class is really focus on online, because that's the world that I'm in. But there are face-to-face applications for some of the things that I'll talk about. So if we move forward, we'll just start with instructor-student. For those of you who are here on your paper, you'll see that's sort of the first point there. And I've given you room for an application nugget, as I call it. Because when you walk away from here, I really do want this to be practical. Sometimes we come to workshops, we walk away and we go, well, that sounded great. I don't even know what I'm going to do in my class. I don't know how that even applies. So when we talk about instructor to student engagement, one of the things that you want to do is grab attention early and often, because the problem with online is they're doing modules, they're self-disciplined, they're working through these modules, but the problem is along the way, even though you may have their attention at the beginning, because the semester's getting started, they're getting everything in their planner, you know, for those ambitious students like I was, I'm writing all my due dates on my calendar so I know when things are due. So there's already sort of this excitement that's already built into the beginning of the semester. By week 2 or 3, they kind of start like, okay, midterms are here. By 4 or 5, you're like, can I just hang on to these students? Can I just grab them for a moment more to get them to that week 8? Well, so a couple of ways that you can really grab their attention early. One is send an email before class ever starts, the week before, to say, hey, my name is, and I'm really excited about this semester. Here's the topics that I'm going to teach. Here are things we're going to be doing. And you begin to generate in them excitement before the class ever starts. And that's just a simple email. And honestly, a quick way to do that is formulate it. And each semester, just fill in the content. Hey, I'm introducing who I am. This is what's going to happen this semester. And I'm so excited that you're a part of this class. Basic, simple things that you can do. And that can happen in the first, like the week before class starts. There's a very real social aspect that people miss to online learning that happens in pre-class and about the first week. Okay, so that very first week, what you see is a social joining between instructor and student, between students and students, because they're feeling out what this class is going to be like. How hard are the assignments? How many group assignments are there going to be? How many individual assignments are there going to be? So when you start looking at this, your presence in the course is going to speak volumes. You want a good review as an instructor for online? Be present in the course. And I'm not saying at the beginning and at the end, but all the way in between. And that's hard because I really do think people think, oh, online's easier. Honestly, online's harder because there's so many different things that can kind of get in your way with online, technology being one of them. It can be frustrating. You don't see the person face to face. I think the percentage now is about 90% of our communication is nonverbal. What if you never see the person? It's all emails and phone calls and text messages and discussion boards. So that makes communication even that harder. So then when you start talking about teacher present, grabbing attention earlier, and for those of you who are in AQ, you'll understand the term meddler in the middle, is that idea of being a facilitator and a guide. And I actually was reading a couple of teacher blogs, and this meddler in the middle actually came up, and it said, actively scaffolding and mediate student learning experiences. So when you're talking about online, things like announcements. Announcements are very rarely used, I find, in some of the classes I'm designing, but such a vital tool because it's an easy way to introduce a topic. It's an easy way to wrap up a topic. Hey, this is what we're going to learn this week. Key points. I hope you're excited about it. Don't forget this is due. Finals in 3 weeks. There's a review in Module 7. Go check it out. End of the week. Hey, wrapping up. Did you have any issues with the content this week? Which that gets down to even student feedback, is asking them, did you understand what we learned this week? And there is a reply function for the announcements. And students can go in there and say, you know, I'm not really getting this, fill in the blank. Announcements, discussion boards. Discussion boards are huge because they allow you to do all of these engagements. Content, student-student, student to instructor. And so when you talk about discussion boards are intended for content delivery. And I think we miss that sometimes because we throw out a question and then we go, students should talk to each other. Students, the instructor presence in there is taking a student comment and going, well, I know you think that, but what about this? The devil's advocate role, the meddler in the middle. Churn the pot. Use your discussion boards to churn the pot. The other one is office hours in Canvas Messenger. This was something that Sherry and I were playing around with. You can actually get into your Canvas course, go into Canvas Messenger, and it works very much like I am, and Instant Messenger. And you say things like, from 2 to 4, I'll be in Canvas Messenger. If you have any questions about this course, I'm available. It's holding office hours online, and it's built into the Canvas course. It's there. Now, do you have to use Canvas Messenger? No. Can you use something like Google Hangouts and kind of generate a discussion thread? Sure. Could you use any real-time kind of thing going on where you hold office hours, you're all online at the same time? It's a great way to introduce instructor-student engagement. I'm running really behind, so I'm going to speed up, and we're going to move on to student-to-student engagement. So when you talk about student-to-student engagement, a lot of what's built in are things like group activities. And we hear group activities, and we go, ah. And if we do that, how do you think a student feels? They go, group activities. But I'll tell you, group activities are the fastest way to garner student-to-student engagement. And it doesn't always have to be formal. Have a brainstorming session in Google Hangouts. You know, generate things like impromptu discussion boards to get the students talking to one another. Ask questions in a discussion board in such a way that students want to answer and reply, and set expectations super early so they know that this is what's expected from your class. So you have things like varying your activities, creating a learning environment, and guess who does that? We do. As instructors, we are the ones who create that environment from the very beginning by setting expectations and saying, okay, this is what my learning environment looks like. We're here to support each other. We're here to challenge each other. we're providing sort of the fertile soil and teaching them how to be learners so that those things can take place. And setting the expectations from the beginning is really, really important. And some of that is just a well-worded paragraph about what discussions are, how they'll function, even how many responses that need to take place. And most instructors already do that because discussion boards are built into Canvas courses as sort of a requirement. But use them in such a way. There's lots of fun ways that you can use discussion boards. Sharon came up with a really good one that it was like a debate style discussion board where you set up sort of pros and cons, and they actually have to get in there and they have to sort of debate this topic even if they don't agree with that side. And it's set up like a debate, and the instructor's the moderator. Those are some of the kinds of things that instructional designers can do for you, is we can help you come up with those kinds of ideas to be able to implement that student-to-student engagement. The last type is student to content engagement. Now this one's the easiest one, I think, because we go, oh, I know what my content is, I can give it to the students. The problem is, this last quote down here, which the Online Teaching Survival Guide by Judith, and I don't know how to say her last name, so I'm just gonna let you read it. This is an excellent book if you're an online instructor. Even if you're a face-to-face instructor, this is an excellent book to get as a resource. And one of the things that she says is all learners do not need to learn all course content, but they do need to learn core content. And we know what the difference is. I may be an expert, and I've actually worked with a course developer, and he said, I know so much, I don't even know what to tell them. And I said, remember when you were a student in this program, what do you need to know? And he's like, there's just so much information. And I said, narrow it down to 8 key points. And from there, there's your 8 modules. So taking these broad ideas that we have, because we haven't been in school, some of us longer than others, for a long time, and making sure that we remember what it was like to be a student and not just throw in content like at a dartboard and hope that it sticks. Like, I hope this sticks, I hope this sticks. But building in opportunities for your students to go, that worked for me, that didn't work for me. And then adjusting your learning. That's really hard as an instructor when you set up a course and a student comes to you and goes, I think we need to go over that again. And then another student and another student. And before you know it, like 70% of your students have come to you and said, that didn't work and I don't understand. And that's on you as a teacher to go, well, breaks. I know I only have 8 weeks or 6 weeks to teach, but they didn't get that core point. I need to circle back around. That's hard to do, but it's necessary when you're listening to your students and asking for their feedback in those things like announcements. Hey, did you have any problems this week? There are a couple of instructors that have built this into their course where at the end of each week, there are kind of discussions and they say things like, hey, is everything working okay? And it's just a discussion thread. It's an impromptu, informal discussion thread. The other one is continual assessment. Again, if you're an AQ, they talk about assessing often, and you do it early and often so that you're constantly getting feedback because you need to know what your students know, right? Any instructor, face-to-face or online, you need to know what your student knows, and that's going to inform what you do for student content engagement. The last one is active learning assignments. One of the things that actually just this week was the jigsaw. The jigsaw activity in AQ, one of the things that they talked about was breaking it into pieces and allowing the students to teach the content. Those are things that can easily even be built into an online course, and you say, well, how can you do that? Well, you assign early, you give them specific directions, and then you allow them to be discussion leaders for that content and teach the other students. You build these things into your course so you can easily do that. Cluster information. So I'll leave you with a statistic, and then I don't even know if we have time for questions because I just rambled on. But 5 to 8 minutes. 5 to 8 minutes. I want that to stick with you. New research is showing, and this is specifically for online, students look at content for 5 to 8 minutes. Okay, so think about the content, and y'all are all laughing, but think about the content that you're trying to deliver in your online class. Your videos, your lecture pages, your overviews, your directions, 5 to 8 minutes to engage your students in such a way that they can learn the content, not all, just core content, and then actually be successful in your course. Now, I know I just dumped a bunch of information on you, but really these things, and as an instructional designer, I can tell you, I know my team that I work with, and I know myself, these are things that we can help you with if you're an online instructor or a face-to-face instructor. These are things that, some of these are things you can incorporate into your online class or your face-to-face class. But let us do that. Let us help you. If you have questions, email us. But with all that said, there's a lot of content here. At the beginning, I asked you for questions. To be thinking about issues you've had in class, issues that have come up before, or just in general, things about student engagement and how to do it. So let's take a few minutes and answer any of those questions. Do we have any online? Okay, we had one online. Does any?
Yeah, let's do a stop share.
Okay. While she's pulling that up, here on campus, are there any questions that you can immediately think of, like at the beginning? What were some of the things that you thought of? Yes.
Are there any behaviors that are frequently mistaken for engagement, but that are not engagement?
That's a good question. I think what you'll see, especially like discussion boards, I answered discussion boards, therefore I'm engaged. And I followed the requirements too, because I answered and I responded to 2 people, therefore I'm engaged. But what happens is you see that type of behavior, but it's bare minimal. And there's not a lot of actual creative thinking going on. So clicking things like you have to respond before you see other people respond, that's actually a parameter that you can put on it so that they have to answer the question before they see anybody else's post. And not every instructor wants that, but that's one way that you can kind of stop that so they're not just reading what everybody else posted and went, oh yeah, that's great. Like that's their response. And some instructors are letting those kinds of things fly, or being okay with that. So I think those kind of things, even completing assignments on time. I completed an assignment on time, therefore I'm engaged in the class. That's not necessarily a sign of engagement. It just means I'm a diligent student and I finished my work. It doesn't mean that they're engaged with the content. It doesn't mean that they're engaging with their peers. You can look at the biggest place is probably their discussion responses and the level of work that they're turning in. Because you'll be able to tell with especially bigger core assessment type assignments if they're actually engaged with the content. You'll be able to tell. That's why we have things like rubrics that are graded. So we go, this exceeds expectation. This is, gosh, above and beyond. And this is just barely meets. This is totally not okay. And this is unacceptable. And making sure that you have those things in place so that it's helping the students know what the expectation is for engagement. That's a good question. Yes.
This isn't a question, but I wanted to share. I looked up the book that you recommended, the Online Teaching Survival Guide, and it is available as something that we could add as an ebook to our collection. So I'm going to see if we can get that added to the library's ebook collection, so then everybody would have access to it all the time. So
it is a great resource. This was one of the first resources I read when I got into designing and developing and teaching online. A friend of mine gave it to me, actually my former boss. And so it's definitely one, and it breaks it into pieces and tips. It's very practical, so you don't feel like you're reading sort of this academic book where you're like, oh, when is she ever going to stop talking? Because we've all had those academic books. This is not one of those. Very practical, breaks it into pieces and chunks like you're supposed to, and you don't feel like you have information overload. Do we come up with
How many tests?
how many tests should be in a course? Well, I don't know that there's a set number. We have some courses that do quizzes every week. We have some that do just the final exam. What I would say is go back to the varied assignments. You don't want everything that you do to be a test, a formal test where you're assessing what they know. And so when you talk about it, I think you have to gauge it from that perspective. Having small quizzes every week is not a bad thing, because it allows you to get that quick data on whether they're getting the content and understanding it, but also knowing that you need a core assessment. And remember, it doesn't always have to be a test. You can do core assessments in a lot of different ways. And so as far as formal testing, it doesn't always have to be a test. So I'm going to be very non-committal on that and just leave it at that. Emily.
I have a question for the group in our remaining few minutes, which is I want to hear what the nuggets were.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'll just, one of mine, well, can I have 2 nuggets?
You can have 2 nuggets. They're right
I'm
there on
not
the
really
table.
eating.
One has toffee, one is just milk chocolate.
Oh, it's okay. One is thinking about low or no stakes group assignments is something that honestly has not occurred to me because I'm so used to using points and grades as a motivator. I'm embarrassed to say. So that's one nugget. And then the other one that I'm taking away from the discussion, where did it go? Oh, is the idea of saying, okay, this week you're going to facilitate the discussion student on this core concept. I haven't thought about that in the context of an online class, although it's a face-to-face strategy that I use all the time. So what are some other nuggets people are taking away? Oh, sure, why not? It's also
Mine is sort of a semi-nugget, because I was sitting there thinking about how unengaged I am in the AQ
This class?
discussions.
I'm just kidding.
No, the AQ discussions where I log on and I see 1,600 people have already, responded, and I don't have the time to kind of engage in this discussion. But the thing that, when you said the low stakes assessments and they don't have to be tests, I was thinking that the little misconception challenge thing, those things really do engage me, and I think those would be really nice things to build in a lot of our courses.
Well, and those are the kind of things that we can build in to a course. It's just a matter of asking. A lot of, at least the ID team, will sit around and go, wouldn't this be cool if, like, what about this? That would be really cool. Oh, I know a class we can implement that in. Those are the kind of, we're brainstorming ideas and just having the ability to implement them on all of these levels, because the reality is across the board you have 3 types of engagement. It should be kind of equal in your courses, whether it's face-to-face or online. You should have equal student to student, student to content, student to instructor. You should be able to look at assignments and your course at sort of the 10,000-foot view and go, ooh, how much of this? I mean, even create for yourself a little rubric if you need to and go, how much of my course is student to student? How much of my course is student to content? How much of my course is instructor to content? Instructor to student. How much of that is going on in my course? And give yourself a little bit of a grade. Test yourself to see and run your courses through that rubric. Any other questions?
I actually have a question on instructor-student interaction, possibly also for the people in this room, including online. How do you approach that and challenge the students? That those who are kind of roughly quiet in the classroom, and then we have activities that you can even tell that some of them just kind of pretend you're working on it, but probably have that idea. But when you approach them, that actually I got the impression it's kind of like I'm kind of a little bit like students seem to be like I'm too embarrassed when you are saying
Okay.
it. How do you work with those students?
Okay, I'll let.
Anybody
You have a question? Yeah, go for it.
If by way of answer, I would say that the first thing I try to do is understand the underlying cause for the lack of engagement. Is the student distressed, ill, angry, distracted, disinterested, spoiled? I would like to add each to the slap, but probably we don't do that. But they have reasons that are not visible to us. There's more to the student's context than what's happening in the classroom. And the second thing is, if there's not some easily identifiable external distractor, like an illness, vary the formats of the responses that you expect. Some of your quietest students long for a chance to write down their thoughts in a controlled, paced manner that doesn't force them to extemporize. Death before extemporaneous. And other students, just as smart, just as much to contribute, it's death before writing. So if you have sometimes the opportunity to write it, sometimes the opportunity to explain it, sometimes the opportunity to display it. You know, if there are a lot of different ways to participate, you're affording each species the opportunity to capitalize on its own strengths. Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I think that could be true for an online course, because if you have an online course that has all writing, what if you have a student there's difficulty with writing? So exactly, I mean, you're spot on, that's where the varying of assignments comes in, and making sure that you know your students, even when they're online and you don't see them face to face, getting to know them, using your instructor introductions and things like that to really garner a community of learning and creating learners, not just learners about your content. If you'll go back to my first, are still in the PowerPoint? Go back to the first slide. I just wanted to end with that sort of quote that we started with by, we think, Ben Franklin. That's where I found it. Is that idea of involvement being the way that a student actually learns. So if you're telling them versus teaching them, and then having the involvement, then that's when they're actually doing the learning. So when they're engaged, they're going to learn, and motivation goes up, student retention is higher, all those wonderful, you know, things that happen when students are engaged. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you all for coming. We hope to see you next month at our next Innovation Exchange. And in the meantime, FCI has lots of awesome events coming up. So we've got special interest groups just in the next week. So check out innovatepark.org.